Let's talk now about wage negotiation season. I thought it used to start around June, July. It seems to come forward every single year, and I wonder why that is. And is it wage negotiation season, or is it negotiating how much you will get before you actually go on strike? These are some of the comments that I've seen flying around on various social media networks and also in newspapers. We're going to discuss it now with a panel of three people in the Cape Town studio with Ms. Brian Cantor from Investec Wealth and Investments, and in Johannesburg, Lone Sharp from AdCorp, and also Chere Monaisa, who is Labour Market Transformation Acting Head of Department at Naledi. Now, I'm going to start with the age of Cape Town. Thanks for joining us, everybody, first of all. I'm going to start with the age of Cape Town over the beauty of Johannesburg. Brian Cantor. Brian, it seems to me that it's been legitimised, it's been formalised, and it's been brought forward, and in that case it raises people's expectations immediately.
What, of expectations of higher wages?
Yes.
Why should it?
I think because it's become something that happens every single year, so it's almost as though there's a sense of wage increase entitlement.
There is, and you could say it's wage increase season and an unemployment increase season as well. So one is mystified by the approach of the unions. I mean, clearly there is bargaining, so you ask for double what you expect to get as a sort of opening bid, but what you expect to get doesn't seem realistic, in that it has been associated over many years now with lower levels of formal employment outside the public sector. So the private sector pays higher wages, more than matches inflation, other employment benefits are sustained, and has learned to manage very effectively with fewer workers.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to Chere Monaisa now in the Power Lunch Johannesburg studio. Associated with lower levels of employment, Chere, but also, I think, also associated in certain cynics' minds with lower levels of productivity, and surely productivity should be part of the discussions.
Well, productivity cannot be looked at in isolation. I think the problem in South Africa is that we have a socio-economic history that was not dealt with when we discussing the transition. So when you talk about productivity, the question is always going to come up in whose favor. And the challenges that are affecting South Africa on wages do not just apply to South Africa right now, but there are some factors that make South Africa a special case, in the sense that we are a society in transition, and some issues were not dealt with fundamentally in such a way that we can talk about productivity in isolation, we can talk about wages in isolation. We have to put everything in the context of South Africa as a former apartheid society, and also in the context of the global economy, whereby the whole world is struggling with this thing of wages and productivity. Productivity has been increasing for years, profits have been increasing for years, and workers' wages have been declining. So I believe what we're seeing now is just a continuation of more contentious labor, business and government relations when it comes to wages all around the world. Spain is one of the most key examples. Cyprus may join the pool of countries that are in trouble. And at the end of the day, it's usually the workers that suffer, and productivity has been rising for years.
Interesting points you've made there, Chere. Let's move on to Lone Sharp now, because I'm sure he's going to contend some of those points. Yeah. Lone, certain issues that weren't addressed, wages staying stable, or actually in real terms coming down, but profits of companies going up. What do you say?
Well, you know, it's interesting Chere raises the democratic transition in South Africa, because the ANC government took quite enthusiastically to the same mechanisms and institutions that were used by the apartheid government to exclude blacks from the workforce. Today, trade unions like COSATU use our bargaining councils to exclude poor blacks from potential employment. So we've really had a continuity of labour practice between the old and the new South Africa. And of course, high wages rising higher than productivity can justify does lead to unemployment. So we really need a political solution to this issue. Either the private interests of trade unions are the political priority of the ANC, or the lack of job prospects for the unemployed. And we have so much evidence that the government favors its trade union partners at every turn, and to hell with the unemployed. I think we're heading in a dangerous situation in South Africa, where formal employment is declining significantly in the private sector. Just in the mining sector, minimum wages reduced mining employment over the last 25 years from 1.4 million to just 523,000. So we really are living with the consequences of very bad labour laws and regulations, most of them carried over in COSATU's interests from the old South Africa.
Brian, that point that Lone just made, 1.4 million down to 520,000, whatever it was, because of minimum wages. I mean, obviously not the only reason, but one of them.
Not the only reason, but if you relate, say, GDP to formal employment, you'll find GDP consistently going ahead, say, not fast enough, 3 or 4%, and employment outside the public sector consistently declining. But South Africa is not so unusual in that you have a labour market of insiders, those with formal employment and all the protection that offers. Spain, I was listening to Spain. Spain is divided between older workers who get amazing protection, in fact 1 year's pay if they're sacked, and young and temporary workers who cannot get in, with more than, at the moment, because of the Spanish economy's travails, more than 50% of young people unable to find work. So South Africa, you've got your insiders who've done very well, but there are fewer of them. And you've got your outsiders desperate to get in fact, dying to get in. I saw that piece, this inquiry into what happened at the Maritzburg police recruiting. 90 jobs on offer, nearly 50,000 people applying. What does that say about your labour market? There's a complete lack of synchronization between the potential supply of workers and the number of formal
what
jobs.
There is a complete lack of dialogue between this between the stakeholders. Cherry, there is a startling similarity between Spain and South Africa. 26-27% formal unemployment in both of those countries, 50 to 55% unemployment in the youth, and also I think very valid points that it's all about insiders and protectionism. What would you say to that?
Now, that is true, but the thing about it is that it's not as if the workers that are called outside of the core, so to speak, it's not as if they are completely separated from the economy. In fact, they are directly linked to many companies through the processes of outsourcing and those kind of things. So a challenge in these things, like I mentioned earlier, the problem is that we're letting globally, since the economic crisis, we've let the issues that caused the crisis, we've let them slide because government came in with an intention to help companies. There's been no active effort to protect workers. It's still the same process of downward flexibility, and it hasn't worked for Spain. That's why Spain is still in the news regularly, because what government chose to do was focus on protecting companies. There wasn't any talks on improving social protection. That's why, as we've been talking about the low-paid workers in South Africa, their demands are only going to get higher and higher, and it's under the current circumstances of unions being under pressure since the Marikana incidents and the farming protest in Ditwarens, that trade unions are going to listen directly to what workers are saying. And it won't be a thing that has happened in the recent past where the trade unions would try to mitigate workers' demands. They're just going to deliver workers' demands as they are. And workers are under that pressure because of low social protection for their extended members of families, as we know that every South African worker on average supports about 4 other people, which usually also includes adult children or other people's children. So
Okay.
The situation
Just
inside
hold
is
that
going
thought
on.
there, Cherry, if you want. I want to get to loan sharp if I can now, because we've only got about 3 minutes left. I want to throw this in, and again, Cherry makes some very good points. But on the other hand, I will make this point now, and we'll all have to comment on this, and that is the rivalry between the unions is fueling the pace of, or potential pace of wage increases, and it is detrimental to the process. There shouldn't be infighting between the unions that says, right, I'll join this, you must join this union because we're going to give you 11% instead of the 7% you've been promised by the union you're with right now. I think that is disgusting personally.
You know, Lindsay, trade unions behave like economic entities, and they can be analysed in that way. They've got the same pressure for membership. They compete with other trade unions. They have to offer benefits to their members that are relevant and applicable. And what's happening in South Africa, interestingly, is that trade union membership is gradually, very gradually, but nonetheless systematically declining. And what you're seeing is a tremendous fight between unions emerging in the context of a scramble for membership. Some unions, the private sector trade unions like Solidarity and Fidusa and NACTU, they're responding in one way by offering greater benefits to their members, bursary schemes for members' children, commuter insurance, funeral insurance, and so on. And then you've got the public sector unions, primarily COSATU, who have been protected against these forces of competition because government employment, on which COSATU so much depends, has been growing dramatically over time. So I think what's playing out in South Africa is really what we would expect of competitive forces. I think what we need is more competition between unions and less regulation in the form of law. I think if we had some of the stupid laws on the books, for example, union members are not required at all to be balloted ahead of a strike. You know, laws that were really so obviously partial to COSATU and its interests when the law was designed in 1995. We need to scrap those laws, and what we will end up with is a highly competitive system between trade unions at the level of the shop floor and the workforce. We've got a system in South Africa.
Exactly right, at the level of the shop floor. Sorry, Lone, can I interrupt you? Yeah, at the level of the shop floor, but not when it comes to, right, we're going to go for 10 because they're going for 9, and then it just carries on like that. I think that is distasteful. Brian Cantor, champing at the bit.
Yes, but let me go back. South African business in general has employed fewer people at much improved conditions of employment, fewer people, and in general has proved highly profitable. We should be quite proud of the fact that South African business is generally well managed with very high returns on capital and lots of incentive to grow their businesses if in fact the environment were more conducive, they would do so. But when we come to the mining sector, and particularly platinum and gold mining, return on capital has disappeared. These are failing industries. There's no return on capital consistent with the risks of doing business in South African platinum and gold mining. And the unions have to recognize that there are many jobs at stake here because, in fact, that particular industry has become unprofitable and won't grow, and that the union leadership should be much more sensitive to the dangers of losses of jobs, because the mining workers who will lose their jobs, more of them will lose their jobs, will not find equivalent work anywhere else.